Hello and a very warm welcome to History Edge. Today, we're going to journey back in time to an era that shaped the world we live in today. We're talking about World War II. Now, I know what you might be thinking. We all learned about it in school, right? Germany invaded Poland on September 1st, 1939, and boom, the world was at war. But what if I told you that's just the tip of the iceberg? The real story is far more complex, a tangled web of economics, politics, and human ambition that began long before the first shots were fired. So, get comfortable, and let's peel back the layers of history together to understand the real reasons the world plunged into its deadliest conflict. To truly grasp why World War II happened, we can't start in 1939. We have to go back another 20 years, to 1919. In the end of the First World War, the victors gathered in a grand hall in France and drafted the Treaty of Versailles. On the surface, it was a peace treaty, but for Germany, it felt more like a punishment. The treaty forced Germany to accept all the blame for the war, paid crippling reparations. Imagine a nation already on its knees from years of war, being handed a bill so large it would take decades to pay. This created a deep sense of national humiliation and resentment. It wasn't just a political document. It was a wound on the German psyche, a wound that would fester for years to come. This peace created the perfect breeding ground for radical ideas and leaders who promised to restore Germany's lost honor. As Germany struggled under the weight of the Versailles Treaty, the world was hit by another catastrophe, the Great Depression. Starting with the Wall Street crash in 1929, a financial tsunami swept across the globe. Economies collapsed, banks failed, and millions of people lost their jobs and savings. In Germany, the situation was dire. Hyperinflation had already wiped out people's life savings once in the early 20s, and now unemployment skyrocketed. People were desperate, hungry, and losing faith in their democratic government, the Weimar Republic, which seemed powerless to stop the crisis. In times of extreme hardship, people often look for simple answers and strong leaders. And in Germany, a charismatic and radical figure was waiting in the wings, ready to exploit this desperation. His name was Adolf Hitler, and his Nazi party promised jobs, stability, and a return to national greatness. The economic collapse wasn't just about money. It was the fuel that powered the rise of extremism. While Germany was in turmoil, other nations were also growing more aggressive. In the East, the Empire of Japan had its own ambitions. It was a rapidly industrializing nation that lacked natural resources, like oil and rubber, to fuel its growing economy and military. Japan looked to its neighbors. In 1931, it invaded Manchuria, a resource-rich region of China, and established a puppet state. The world watched, but did very little. The League of Nations, the international body created after World War I to prevent another major conflict, proved to be completely ineffective. It condemned Japan's actions, but had no power to enforce its decisions. This sent a dangerous message to other expansionist powers. You can take what you want, and there will be no real consequences. This failure to act decisively emboldened dictators like Hitler and Mussolini in Italy, showing them that the international community lacked the will to stand up to aggression. The path to war was being paved, one unchecked act of aggression at a time. Back in Europe, Hitler had risen to power in 1933, and he immediately began to dismantle the Treaty of Versailles, piece by piece. He started secretly rearming Germany, rebuilding its army, navy, and air force in direct violation of the treaty. Then, in 1936, he took a massive gamble. He ordered his troops to march into the Rhineland, a demilitarized zone on the border with France. His own generals were terrified, convinced that the French army would crush them. But France and Britain did nothing. This policy became known as Appeasement. The leaders of Britain and France, haunted by the memory of World War I, were desperate to avoid another war at any cost. They hoped that if they gave Hitler what he wanted, he would eventually be satisfied. So they stood by as he annexed Austria in 1938, and then later that year, They handed him a large part of Czechoslovakia at the Munich conference, believing his promise that it was his last territorial demand in Europe. But Hitler wasn't a man who could be appeased. Every concession only strengthened his position and convinced him that the Western democracies were weak and decadent, unwilling to fight for their principles. By 1939, Hitler had his sights set on his next target, Poland. He demanded the return of the city of Danzig and a corridor of land connecting Germany to its province of East Prussia. But this time, things were different. Britain and France, finally realizing that appeasement had failed, had guaranteed Poland's independence. They warned Hitler that if he invaded Poland, it would mean war. For months, a tense diplomatic standoff unfolded. Behind the scenes, however, Hitler pulled off a shocking masterstroke. In August 1939, the world was stunned to learn that Nazi Germany and the Communist Soviet Union, two sworn ideological enemies, had signed a non-aggression pact. Secretly, this pact included a protocol to divide Poland and the rest of Eastern Europe between them. This was Hitler's fatal mistake, but also his green light. By securing his Eastern Front from a Soviet attack, he felt he had a free hand to invade Poland without facing a two-front war. He believed Britain and France were bluffing and would back down once again. He was catastrophically wrong. On September 1st, 1939, under the false pretext of a Polish attack on a German radio station, German forces stormed across the border into Poland. This was not a traditional battle. It was a new kind of warfare called Blitzkrieg, or lightning war. Tanks, planes, and infantry moved with terrifying speed and coordination, overwhelming the Polish defenses. The Polish army fought bravely, but they were outmatched in technology and tactics. They had expected a war of trenches, like World War I, not this mobile onslaught. Just over 2 weeks later, on September 17th, the Soviet Union invaded from the east, sealing Poland's fate as per their secret agreement with Hitler. The country was caught in a vice, crushed between two of the most powerful totalitarian regimes in history. The invasion of Poland was the final straw. On September 3rd, after their ultimatum for Germany to withdraw went unanswered, Britain and France declared war on Germany. The fragile peace that had held for 2 decades was shattered, and the world was plunged into World War II. So, why do we still get it wrong? We often see the invasion of Poland as the single cause, the spark that lit the fire. But as we've seen, it was merely the final event in a long chain reaction. The fire had been smoldering for 20 years, fed by the punitive Treaty of Versailles, the economic devastation of the Great Depression, the failure of the international community to stop early aggression, the misguided policy of appeasement, and the cynical pact between Hitler and Stalin. Each step made the next one more likely, until war became almost inevitable. It wasn't one man's decision or one country's action, but a global failure of politics, economics, and diplomacy. It's a sobering lesson that peace is fragile and requires constant vigilance, courage, and a willingness to stand up for one's principles before it's too late. The cost of this failure was astronomical, beyond anything the world had ever seen. We're not just talking about the financial cost. The human cost was the most shocking of all. An estimated 70 to 85 million people perished, the majority of them civilians. Entire cities were reduced to rubble, from London and Coventry to Dresden and Tokyo. The war unleashed unimaginable horrors, including the systematic genocide of 6 million Jews and millions of others in the Holocaust. It redrew the map of the world, ended the age of European empires, and gave rise to 2 new superpowers, the United States and the Soviet Union. The world that emerged from the ashes in 1945 was fundamentally and forever changed. Understanding the causes of this monumental conflict is not just an academic exercise. It's a crucial reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition, nationalism, and economic desperation, and a lesson we must never forget. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into one of history's most pivotal moments here at History Edge. I hope it gave you a new perspective on these complex events. Please consider liking the video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that shaped our world. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.